This is a fire and brimstone type of sermon. No, not at all.
Oh, rats.
So, anybody ever here watch TV? Yes. Go to the movies? Read science fiction or fantasy literature? Yeah. Follow the news?
Yes.
Then we all know that human obsession with end-of-the-world scenarios, right? We love them. And they've been around for a very long time, and they're not going away anytime soon. And it doesn't really matter whether, the end of the world is brought about by nuclear destruction, the rise of machines, or zombies, or human mutants. Maybe it's an alien invader, 4 demons on horseback, or a wrathful God. The mechanism of destruction is really secondary to what these stories say about a society. What is often called apocalyptic literature and apocalyptic movements that often go along with them do not emerge for no reason. Now, most of us are likely familiar with the Jewish and Christian apocalyptic writings, at least those found in the Bible. There are others. There's only 2 of them, main ones that really got included in the Bible. That's the book of Daniel, which was written around 165 BCE. And the story there is set during the 6th century BCE when the Jews were exiled in Babylon. Which is generally recognized as the lowest point in Jewish history. But when the book was written in 165, Israel was being ruled by the Seleucids as part of the Mesopotamian Syrian Empire. And in the year 169 BCE, Antiochus IV outlawed Judaism and the temple was desecrated. And remembering that the book of Daniel was written in 165 BCE, the Maccabean revolt that began in 164, that eventually led to approximately 100 years of independence before the Romans showed up. And of course, this is all appropriate actually now, coincidentally, to the fact that, that's the story of Hanukkah, is around this reconsecration of the temple. So as for that other apocalyptical book in the Bible, a book of Revelation, well, let me say this. It's not a prophecy of future events. It was written about 95 CE, the end of the 1st century, reportedly written by John of Patmos. Perhaps you might have recognized, you may not recognize yet that there's a pattern here that led up to the story, the writing of the story. In 69, following the death of Nero and a year-long civil war, Vespasian was made emperor around in 70. And then Titus, the son of Vespasian, captures Jerusalem and destroys the temple, ending a 4-year-long Jewish revolt. And in 79 CE, that's Mount Vesuvius erupted. It put the fear of goddess into everybody in the Mediterranean. So in the book of Revelation was written during the reign of Domitian, who was one of the worst persecutors of early Christians, right up there with good old Nero. Nero, whose full name, when transcribed into the numerology of the day, not coincidentally adds up to 666.
Wow.
Yes. There was a real fear in the culture at the time that Nero would actually come back, that he wasn't actually dead, that he would return from the dead or return and continue what he started. They were afraid of Nero. Now, the book of Revelation was a masterfully crafted historical allegory, not prophecy. And it was written to give hope to the faithful during turbulent times. And these were very turbulent times for Christians. And so that you don't think that this is a Judeo-Christian phenomenon only, in the year 184 CE, an apocalyptic movement grounded in Taoist belief called the Yellow Turban Rebellion led to armed conflict in China. So even Taoism led to this type of of behaviors. It grew out of several years of famine, forced immigration, exploitation of farmers and settlers, high taxes to fund construction projects. You see the pattern. Now, much of our modern literature, TV, movies, depicting dystopic futures, end-of-the-world scenarios, are generally not referred to as apocalyptic in nature. You know, there isn't the title apocalyptic nature, apocalyptic films or anything like that. And there's no Walking Dead or Hunger Games movements out there per se, but we do have people called preppers, and they have their own TV show, and they're preparing for the fall of society. They're actually preparing for everything to fall apart. There's countless websites. There's lots of ways to get into it. And actually, some of this stuff is actually pretty good stuff. It's how to make your own food, grow your own food, and all these different things. It's really good stuff. Actually, I would say do it. It would help prevent the fall of society. But, you know. Then there's also not just the preppers, but there's all of the militias out there that, you know, they aren't just preparing for the end of the world. They're kind of working to make it happen, right? In her book, The Real History of the End of the World, author Sharon Newman points out that almost every culture has some belief or old myth that tells how the gods or God renew the earth that has become morally corrupt. It seems that people everywhere have looked around at the chaos caused by nature or humanity and at some point have just thrown up their hands, too overwhelmed with the problem to see a way to fix it. Now, most people believe that apocalypse is synonymous with death and destruction. The word in classic Greek simply means lifting of the veil, or revelation, the lifting of the veil. In the movie Apocalypse Now was not about the death and destruction of the Vietnam War. That was just the setting. The story was of Colonel Kurtz, the officer who lost touch with reality, only coincidentally played by an actor who kind of done the same thing. Sorry. The apocalypse, the lifting of the veil of the story. The apocalypse was of civilization being lifted, that veil of civilization being lifted in wartime. To see the truth of the man, Kurtz, behind the refinements of society and the discipline of his rank and all his privilege. And the movie was largely based on Joseph Conrad's book, Heart of Darkness. Now, from part 3, Heart of Darkness, Conrad writes, whether Kurtz knew of his deficiency himself, I can't say. I think the knowledge came to him at last, only at the very last. But the wilderness found him out and had taken vengeance for the fantastic invasion. I think it had whispered to him things about himself which he did not know, things of which he had no conception till he took counsel with this great solitude. And the whisper had proved irresistibly fascinating. It echoed loudly within him because he was hollow at the core. Kurtz was hollow at the core once you lifted the veil of civilization, the veil of privilege. Of course, Heart of Darkness is about the invasion of the African continent by Europeans. Now people, all people, you, me, we like a certain degree of structure in our lives. We like order. Some of us, of course, are more structured than others, but even the most freewheeling, footloose, and fancy-free among us have a routine that we're accustomed to. Even if it's just, getting our coffee in the morning, taking a shower, it can be a real basic routine, but we still all appreciate routine. It's the way the human brain works. It's the foundation of culture, of religion, routines. we tend to prefer structure over chaos. All the ancient myths of beginnings are about the defeat of chaos and the creation of a new god or society to rule. However, when our structures break down, when our personal routines and beliefs, when society itself is bursting at the seam, threatening chaos, when the cycles of nature are breaking down, when the illusion of order is stripped away from us, when the underlying chaos of life becomes evident and undeniable, it is during these times that our deepest self is revealed to us. It's when that veil is lifted. And if that deeper self, if it be hollow, then woe to us all. But if it's developed, if it is awake to the truth of reality, there we find hope and love. It is there then, when that veil is lifted, that we see new possibilities. Apocalyptic movements occur during times of unrest, which naturally create in people the impression that the sky is falling. And it's the same for individuals, for societies. It's hard to imagine when we're in the middle of all that chaos, when nothing was as it was, or nothing is as we thought it was, when all our perceptions of the world fall apart, it's hard to imagine that a new order will return. It's at these times that our greatest fears are laid bare. It's at these times that our beliefs are proven incomplete or even incompatible with reality. It is at these times that our faith is most tested. But isn't the way of nature that when one system falls apart, when one season ends, a new one begins? Isn't that the way it works? When what is normal today is stripped from us, a new normal always emerges. In order for a more equitable, more peaceful future to be born, something must die today. In order for the sun to rise in the morning, it had to set the night before. Each of us has most likely felt we've reached the end of what we can handle. Each of us has most likely felt as though there can be no tomorrow, some point in our lives. Most of us have been there. But in time the veil of fear and despair is lifted to reveal a previously unimagined reality. A new normal emerges. When I woke on Wednesday, November 9th, I did not have a word for how I felt. It was different from what I was seeing around me. It was neither happy nor sad. I was not fearful, perhaps a little concerned, but also some hope. I saw hope. It took some time to sort through it. I think I figured it out. I didn't know what to name this feeling that I had on November 9th after the election. But the best word I've come to understand now is determined. But several synonyms also seem to apply. Purposeful, undaunted, intent, steadfast, tenacious, committed, and one of my favorites, indefatigable. You just don't get to say that often. Looking back, I think I recognized that in this election, this whole cycle and everything that's happened and the results, an apocalypse has occurred. This is the apocalypse, not the apocalypse, an apocalypse. It's an unveiling. It's not the end of the world. It was just unveiling something that's been there. Some long hidden truths could now be seen in the light of day in order to be excised. In a way, I was reminded of Marianne Williamson's quote, one of my favorite. Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear that we are powerful beyond measure. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, and fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be? Your playing small does not serve the world. We are all meant to shine as children do. And as we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give others permission to do the same. This is how I felt. That I could no longer hide that deeper self, my gorgeous, talented, fabulous self. Oh, I forgot brilliant. I had to stop playing small. That was my sense of determination. And so that leads us to a place that we can begin to excise, bring to the light of day what's going on in the world. And that excision will not be easy, it will not be painless, it will not happen overnight, but it is necessary. Because just as it is necessary to excise a tumor or an abscess before the body can heal, our nation must address and excise the tumors of systemic racism, governmental corruption, environmental degradation, and the military-industrial complex. Now think of complex like you would like a psychological disorder. Yeah. Now how we use that word, complex? Yeah, we have this military-industrial complex. It's a psychological disorder, national psychological disorder. It's a disease. Now I want to be clear. Our president-elect is not the disease. His election is a symptom. And I would say the exact same thing if the election went the other way. Different symptom, same diseases. Just consider, for example, what it takes for presidential candidates to raise this much money. Consider what compromises must be made, even to the most resolute, honest, qualified person. What sacrifices must be made to raise $1.3 billion? And that's combining the campaign, the party and fundraising committees, and all the super PACs. And the idea that they're all secret and they don't all talk to each other. Yeah, we know better, right? So consider what it takes for any candidate to raise that kind of money. Not just once, but for every election. Now, I've intentionally not used the word winner and loser here around this election because the person who won the most votes lost the election, and the person who won the election does not have the popular support. But that's another problem that I'm not going to get to yet. We're still on the money issue. Because money in politics has been a problem for a long time, long before Citizens United brought it out of the shadows. And I think it's safe to say, and this is the part that's been unveiled to us, that it's safe to say that both parties have benefited from Citizens United. The Supreme Court decision that equated money with speech and paved the way for unlimited amounts of money to be spent during elections, much of it anonymously. That $188 million is anonymous. Now, at the time of Citizens United, it was largely perceived that this decision helped Republicans more than Democrats, but the numbers actually, and not just this year, but the numbers over time indicate otherwise. So rather than take a principled stand and refuse to let money further corrupt the system, Democrats put on the ring of power and tried to fight corruption with corruption. Okay, well, we're not as corrupt as they are. We can collect all this money, but we won't be corrupted by it. No. The means is the message. They cannot be separated. We cannot fight corruption with corruption. We cannot use violence to end violence. We cannot use hatred to end hatred. So if we want to do anything in this country to turn things around, one of the first things we need to do is overturn Citizens United. Because as long as it stands, there can be no reform. Not for elections, not for the environment, unjust drug laws, prison reform, surely not in matters of defense, because that's where all that money is coming from. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never has and it never will. That demand is not coming from any single politician or any political party. So where must it come from? Okay, now let's talk about this electoral college thing. Now, it's actually a vestige of our nation's original sin. The acceptance of slavery in spite of our declaration that it is self-evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We make that claim, but yet we have an electoral college that was not originally based on votes. It was based on population. And this is where the idea that slaves were counted as 3/5 of the citizen, to boost the population of slaveholding states. Now, the founders, especially those in the South, remember, many of our first presidents came from Virginia. Yeah. They were actually afraid of direct election, largely because it would have given more power to the North, which of course was more densely populated. Now, over time, we've changed aspects of electoral college because of enfranchisement of African Americans and women. So the rules have been changed, but the system still serves to favor those states that are less densely populated, as this graphic shows. So basically, somebody from Wyoming, their vote counts more than a person from California. I come from California, and this always bothered me. How it takes, in this example, it takes 705,000 Californians to equal one electoral vote, and just 194,000 Wyomingites to equal one electoral vote. This is not one person, one vote. I don't think it's a coincidence that many of the same states that benefit from electoral college, these are the same states that supported slavery to a large extent, the same states where segregation was most hotly contested, and the same states that are now actively working to suppress voter turnout through unnecessary regulation. And who are they trying to suppress the vote of? African Americans, right? So in his recent essay, The Dream of White Innocence, the Reverend William Singford, former president of the Unitarian Universalist Association, he's made the point that we have corporations and entertainers pulling out of states that try to roll back LGBTQ rights, but not when states roll back voting rights. Think about that. What's the difference? Why are we more outraged at society over the infringements of rights for our LGBTQ friends and family, but not voting rights? in that same essay, Reverend Singford, writing about what Martin Luther King Jr. would be saying about what is happening in our country today, he writes, "I think he would condemn the war on drugs just as he condemned the Vietnam War, and for the same reason. Both were waged on the backs of the poor and the people of color. I think he would call income equality a moral failure, not just an economic reality. He would rail against religious bigotry, against the building of walls on our borders, against talk of banning all Muslims. He would call people of faith to be divinely dissatisfied with the world as it is, just as he was divinely dissatisfied with the world when he lived." Are we divinely dissatisfied? Included in this essay, the top was a painting called Picnic by Brittany Leanne Williams, from a series of paintings called Leisure and the Unseen. I'm going to put it up there. Let's take a few moments to look at this picture. Saturday Night Live had a great response to the election results, I think. One skit in particular that I found especially relevant included Chris Rock and Dave Chappelle, two men of color watching the election results with a group of white friends. And as election results began to go against the desires of their liberal white friends in attendance, they all expressed surprise at the results, shock even. While Chappelle and Rock, they were surprised and shocked at how clueless their white friends seemed. Has everyone seen in this painting the black man hanging in the shadows? This election has unveiled for many of us the true depth of America's racial divide. I'm not saying all Trump supporters are racist. Far from it. If exit polls are correct anyway. The polls show that most of his supporters voted for Trump in spite of his rhetoric, not because of it. But there are those emboldened by that rhetoric. And now we can see it. For everyone to see. For too long, well-meaning, kind-hearted white people have been able to say, oh, it's not that bad. Because they don't see it. That veil has been lifted. It's there. So back to those Trump voters who say they did not support his rhetoric, who voted for him in spite of it. They voted him because they saw him representing change. They voted against the current system. Which, in spite of having an African-American president, disproportionately imprisons black Americans, disproportionately kills unarmed black Americans in the name of law and order. They voted to change the system that treats Native Americans with even greater scorn than black Americans. They voted to change the system that is destroying the environment at an increasingly unsustainable rate. They voted to change the system that is bombing non-American people around the world to bolster our economic well-being. So when you see this meme, or something like it in support of our current president, all these great economic, things that supposedly he's done, well, how did he do it? Well, got to look at this as well. Annual Defense Budget Authority, highest under President Obama. This doesn't include just what we're spending, but what we sell to the world. We are selling weapons, mass destruction all around this world. to bolster our economic well-being. This is part of the complex. This is the part we haven't seen. We need to see this. If people want change, then let's start working for it. I think that's the overwhelming outcome of this. Over half of our nation did not even vote for either candidate. That's telling. That's not the problem, that's a symptom. That's a symptom. The veil has been lifted. The apocalypse is here, and the failure of neoliberal economics has been laid bare for all to see. Now, Cornel West puts it this way: the lethal fusion of economic insecurity and cultural scapegoating brought neoliberalism to its knees. In short, the abysmal failure of the Democratic Party to speak to the arrested mobility and escalating poverty of working people unleashed a hate-filled populism and protectionism that threatened to tear apart the fragile fiber of what is left of U.S. democracy. Both parties have neglected what's going on in the middle class, the vast majority of American lives. Black, white, doesn't matter. It's happening to everyone. All our great job success, we had great numbers on jobs. Those are minimum wage jobs. The veil has been lifted. We can see now what was formerly in the shadows of our collected unconscious. And now that that veil has been lifted, it is our task to stay woke, as Black Lives Matter urges us, or as Martin Luther King said, not sleep through the revolution. Let us feel what we feel, grieve what we must around this election, but let us not linger too long on what may have been. Let us not jump to worst case scenarios and fall into despair. This is not the end of the world. Our spiritual task is to face the reality of what is happening right now. Because right now, nothing is set in stone. That new normal has not set in yet. So let us face the situation right now as it is. Let's come to terms with it, and then let's get busy. Because as Reverend Singford reminds us, resistance is what love looks like in the face of hate. Resistance is what love looks like in the face of violence. Let us resist with mind, with body, with spirit, from where we are and what we are each able to do. And resistance looks different for each of us, but resist we must, if we would not see fear and hatred and violence become the new normal. Let us resist from where we are as individuals, but let us remain in community. Let us build on our strength as a community and bind with other communities of faith. We need each other. Let us remain grounded in community and in nature and in our relationships. We must maintain our spiritual practice. This is part of the battle. To build up our inner selves so that we aren't hollow inside. Let's resist the temptation to fall into despair, to return hate with hate. Let us resist with love, because the means is the message. The means is always the message. There is hope in love. If there's hope at all, It is in love. As our Universalist forebears taught us, it's our job to go out there and love the hell out of this world. Last time I was here, I talked about what is going on up at Standing Rock. Resistance and love. They are resisting and winning with prayer circles up against a militarized police force. And they are winning. They are winning the hearts and the minds of the American public, and they are winning in court. Because what is the scariest thing to an oppressive government? The united people, we the people. That opening song this morning, I used that because it was this week, 36 years ago this week, that John Lennon was shot. The day before my 17th birthday, so I can never forget it. He told us so much, but I think I'm reminded how, though we lost his body 36 years ago, his spirit, his love, his music, his message is still with us. There is power in communities of love. And it is the one power strong enough to change the world. Imagine that. So be it. Amen. Blessed be.